Hi, everyone. We are taking on what is called the graveyard shift, but we're going to make it as much fun as possible, yeah? Today we're talking about smart cities and investment in smart cities, and more particularly culture and people. What is it that makes a smart city smart? I would like to introduce you to a league of extraordinary gentlemen, Bernard, Duval, DC, and at the end, from Saint-Germain, is Claude. Yeah. So I would like our panelists to each introduce themselves and to offer us a position on smart cities. What are they? Are they smart? Should investors invest in them? Let's start with the definition. Over to you, Bernard.
Okay, hi everyone. So my name is Bernard Bineguaho. I work for a French consulting company, so we work on digital infrastructure and digital services. I'm based in Rwanda, so I've been working in Rwanda for the last 4 years. So there's no answer to the question of what is a smart city. I just say it's using today's tech, the possibilities of today's technology to better manage a city and improve quality of life for its citizens. That would be my definition. And then there was another question, do we need smart cities? So I don't know if we need smart cities, but we definitely need more sustainable and more resilient cities. We need to be able to better manage basic services. I mean, I'm talking about utilities such as water, such as energy, such as roads, transport, health, etc. So today there is technology, some of it is digital, some of it isn't, that enables us to do things better, to change the way we do things and improve quality of life. So yeah, that for me is the basic definition of what is a smart city. And I'd say without increasing the digital divide. So I think that is a really big challenge when you're implementing smart city solutions, is it must be done taking into account the problems of penetration, internet penetration that we have, and making sure that these new services are accessible to as many of the people in the city as possible. Otherwise, you're just making things worse. Yeah.
Great. So, Bernard, what I really appreciate about what you're saying is that you're pointing to diversity and inclusion. And absolutely, spot on the money there. Duval, over to you. Could you tell us a bit about yourself and your position on smart cities, please?
Sure. So I'm part of Stellenbosch University Launch Lab. And specifically within the company, I run the Climate Lab. So it's a climate accelerator, and we focus on companies that help to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions or helping cities and society to adapt to the inevitable changes that we'll have. Specifically, what is the definition of a smart city? Probably the same. I think Bernard's already given a great answer, but I think specifically working with startups and working with small companies, we always start with the problem. So I think smart cities is just a way of saying, like, with populations increasing, with more people moving into cities, with more people come more problems, and data and technology is just a really nice way and a good way to actually solve these issues. Another thing that we teach our startups is a principle called measure what matters. You first need to measure stuff to be able to make key interventions. So from that perspective, I think smart cities is a great way of having certain IoT devices and stuff like that to start measuring water consumption, electricity consumption, and then to be able to make interventions and see how that pans out. Should we have smart cities is the third question. I think the opposite is having like dumb cities. So I think from that perspective, it's definitely something that we need to push for. Yeah.
Great. I like the fact that you brought up the concept of a dumb city. We like to unpack a dumb city versus a smart city, but perhaps not today. Over to DC. DC?
Thank you, Charles. So my name is DC Mavaro, and I'm currently working in the EV space, mainly looking at funding small startups that are based in 4 strands, so mainly looking at infrastructure development, software, hardware, and the second life battery. So just touching on the topic, what are smart cities? I think the gentlemen on my left have done a great job in defining them, but the only other 2 things I probably would add is probably looking at cities that are looking at data and collecting that data to enable a better living standard for everybody, and probably adding on to that as well as using digital technology.
Great. Claude, thank you for taking time to be with us. And you're a specialist in circular economies. So when you speak to the smart city concept, can you talk to us about circular economies and kind of how they relate? And get away, Fly.
So thank you for inviting me. Yes, maybe I can. So I've introduced myself earlier with the challenge, but my name is Claude Sébastien Lerbourg, and I can say a bit more maybe of my experience. I've been for 5 years. I've been part of the corporate venturing, so investment in startups for the group Saint-Gobain, and so I've been exposed to a lot of those solutions that want to improve the smartness of the city. I've also have an experience in China, so I've spent 12 years there, and China is a very interesting case study because they've been rebuilding cities from scratch in the last 20 years, and they've tried a lot of initiatives to make smart cities with massive investments. So I just wanted to say this. On my current role as the director of external ventures for Europe, South Africa, and Middle East, we look at startup investment in certain areas, and one of them, as you mentioned, is circular economy. And the way the city can be smart is also by reusing of course the materials that are already here to rebuild in a better way. What I wanted to say about smart city maybe is that every city is different, and at one point you need to have I think an angle of what is going to be the most important issue you're going to solve in this city first. And so there are a lot of opportunities. The previous brainstorming or workshop I've attended on smart cities, you have a very broad range of different stakeholders that are involved, and it's passionating, but it's very challenging also to get it on with.
Great, thanks very much. So I'm Charles Matthews, and I come from Inc. Africa. We tell stories of entrepreneurs in sub-Saharan Africa, and it's the greatest job I have ever had. I can tell you we've been going since January this year, and the one thing I have learned about founders in Africa and entrepreneurs in Africa, that they're very different to entrepreneurs in the United States. Yeah. So in the United States, we see entrepreneurs like Elon Musk, spaceships to get away from planet Earth. And after the takeover of Twitter, perhaps we can understand why Elon wants to get away from planet Earth. Come to Africa, what do you find? You find founders solving problems. But I'd like to ask everyone to put themselves in the shoes of an investor, because we're talking about investment and smart cities. We have someone from Kigali, Bernard is from Kigali, and we have Duval, who's a South African. And what I'd like to, if you put yourself in the shoes of an investor, pretend you are an investor, take yourself back to 1994, South Africa and Rwanda. South Africa was on the cusp of the most glorious democracy, and Johannesburg was alive with Mandela fever. We were called a rainbow nation at that stage, not true. In 1994 in Rwanda, the rivers were running with blood. So if you were an investor in 1994, which city would you have invested in? Johannesburg or Kigali? Yeah. And look at those cities today. I would like to ask Bernard, what are the lessons that can be learned in Kigali? And then Duval, I would like to ask you, what are the lessons for Cape Town and Johannesburg as it is today?
Okay, so I'm not going to talk about the genocide over here, but what I have learned from Kigali, which can be applied globally to the smart city, the talk about smart cities, is for me, what I really believe is that citizen engagement is just fundamental when you're implementing new solutions to solve all these problems that the cities are facing. Without citizen engagement and citizen participation, the solutions that you're going to implement are not going to be viable on the long run. So what does that mean? It means you've got to change the relationship between, I think, the city and the local authorities. You have to find ways in which you make the citizen. So I'm not talking about solutions that are citizen-centric. So we use the word a lot, citizen-centric, for the solutions. But for me, citizen-centric means how do you make the citizen participate in the decisions, and how do you make him participate in the implementation? And I think that is one thing I've learned. So Kigali is as the cleanest city in Africa. Why is it clean? It's not clean because there's some fancy tech, you know, that disposes of rubbish immediately and that you don't see it. It's clean because the people keep it clean. There is just no littering in Kigali. People just don't throw anything on the road, on the street, etc., as they're walking. And that is because for them it's a source of, I don't know, but pride. It's their city, so they keep it clean. It's nothing else. And you can see this this could be, you know, used for everything. It could be used for water management, for waste management, for roads, for traffic, etc. So you need citizens on board. That, for me, is my first lesson. So just to give an example, Kigali is implementing a citizen engagement platform. So it's a platform where a citizen is walking about in the street, and if he sees something that doesn't work, like he sees a light bulb, a lamp outside which is not working, he sees a light which is not working, a traffic light, he sees a pothole, he sees whatever, he uses this app, it geolocalizes the problem, and it sends it to the local authorities, but it sends it to the right person in the local authorities, so it's routed properly. And then they have to give him feedback and everything. So that is a way of empowering the citizen. Now, such an application will not work if the city behind is not reactive and doesn't fix that problem quickly, because then people will just stop using the app. So there's a risk in putting up these things. But Kampala has done the same thing. So they've done the same thing for traffic. So there is an app that has been launched in Kampala where if you have a problem on the road, you can signal it, it goes to there's a person dedicated, and they try and fix things up as quickly as possible. So yeah, I think a lot of cities are understanding that they have to engage their citizens. That means there has to be some trust. That means they have to be reactive, they have to answer. But I think that is the way forward for all these problems. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Bernard. And I have asked you to play investor. So which city are you going to invest in, Johannesburg or Kigali? You have to make a choice.
I live in Kigali, so...
Investment is all about making hard choices.
Well, investment is improving the quality of your life, so I'll start with where I live, I guess.
Great answer. Duval, speak to us about Johannesburg, and if you can offer thoughts about Cape Town as well.
Okay, yeah, I've lived in both Johannesburg and in Cape Town. Johannesburg is where I grew up, and Cape Town is where I'm currently staying, and also in Stellenbosch is where I work. I think the key lessons potentially from a South Africa perspective is we've rested on our laurels to a large extent from 1994. South Africa's always had, Bernard and I were speaking about this before, we've actually got fantastic infrastructure in South Africa. The biggest thing that we haven't done is to maintain that infrastructure. So a lot of the problems, I mean, South Africa has now had load shedding, water shedding, petrol shedding we're going to have soon. So a lot of these problems were already communicated 10, 15 years back when we had these, places like Eskom used to be the place, I'm a chartered accountant, and everyone always wanted to go and work for Eskom. Now, like the last place where people want to go and work is, for instance, like Eskom. It's one of the most difficult companies. And so I think the key thing is really for other cities to learn from is to really extrapolate what is going to happen to ensure that you maintain. Kigali is an interesting concept. It's a city of about 1 million people, I think. Cape Town and Joburg's closer to 5-6 million people. It goes back to my original point that the moment that you've got larger populations, it does become more difficult to manage. So there's a lot to be done and to learn from other cities. I've recently gone through a workshop where I've had to the privilege to work with a lot of Indian entrepreneurs. And some of the solutions that's coming out of India and big population growth is a place where really our cities can go and actually go and take some of those lessons. Yeah. And on the investing front, I'm quite fortunate in that our mandate allows us to invest in both South Africa and in East Africa, so I'd say both. It's two very different markets and we like both.
Great. DC, I'm going to throw a different question at you. You look like a well-traveled gentleman. Which are your smartest cities? And as an investor, which smart city would you invest in and why?
So based on the data that I've been looking at or what we've been looking at is probably, I'd say Amsterdam is quite way ahead of there. And from an Asia point of view, you're looking at cities like Shanghai in China. I think those cities have come a long way in terms of building the infrastructure to become what they've become in terms of smart cities. They're using a lot of technology and using that technology to enable them to get a better quality of life. So in Amsterdam, for example, there's a lot of there's a push for greener, much more greener way of traveling. They use a lot of bikes and they've lots of trams, and a lot of cars don't actually go into the city center itself. So from an investor point of view, I probably would be looking at cities where I can see that there's a lot of potential and there's quite a lot of, in terms of growth prospects, there's quite a lot of people that are going to be going in and becoming urbanized. So maybe a city like London, for instance, there's still quite a long way to go, and there's quite investor friendly, and there's quite a lot that you can get back in terms of returns as an investor.
Great, thank you so much, DC. Are there any questions from the audience? Please formulate your question while I hand over to Claude. And Claude, your perspective as an investor, is Amsterdam the best city in the world? Or do you have a different perspective? And I know that you're quite contrary about smart cities. Please tell us why.
Okay. So I do believe smart cities, like having a smart city will be a great differentiator. So for example, in Africa, the first city that will be considered as a smart city will definitely attract talents and will generate a lot of value for the community. And but it's at the moment it's still a dream. But it's still a dream that I think can happen. When we see the major changes that happen in the last 30, 50 years, it's possible that in the next 30, 50 years we'll really see like smart cities as it's defined, as the dream. He mentioned at the moment Shanghai. I've been living in Shanghai for many years. There are some good and bad aspects, but in terms of connectivity and I would say in terms of safety, it's very impressive actually how the city is. There's cameras everywhere. You don't really see them, but they see you. And what's interesting is that it helps on the safety part. So there's not so much like thief and murders and problems like this. And if there is, actually I have a friend who had the experience of getting his bike stolen. You're able to go to the police office and they can track from the moment the bike was taken to the moment like the guy arrived to where he is. It's kind of like you're able to retrace when there's a problem coming. So it's very impressive what can be done. It's a bit scary also for people who want to be completely free from the city. But I think there's always places you can go to. But I think in the end the smart city will have great infrastructure, great control of energy efficiency and stuff like that. But it will also probably bring safer cities.
Very interesting. Reminds me of a poem that has in it one of the stanzas talks about machines of loving grace that look after us in the beautiful open field. It's nice that someone has a very beneficial idea of the singularity and interconnectedness and smart cities. Let's go to the audience. Thank you. Do you have a mic? Could you please take the mic, identify yourself, and then ask your questions, please?
Awesome. Hi. My name is Clayton. I'm founder of DevTouch in the accessibility space. So this topic is actually quite relevant to the space that we find ourselves in. So really great topic so far. I think one thing that stands out for me in this conversation is more a case of why are we using technology to compensate for the lack of human behavior, and then trying to call that smart when it's actually our task to smarten up the people and in that way make the city smart. Because I think the case of Kigali for me really stands out from the conversation so far is that yes, it's a million, a population of 1 million people, but there's things that they are doing right purely based on human behavior, and therefore when you integrate technology into that, then it becomes a smart city. So I think the question really is more a case of where do we then start, because you find a lot of Africans coming into cities like Cape Town, and before you know it, they've adapted to the culture of Cape Town or the people in South Africa per se, and all of a sudden they're littering and also damaging property and infrastructure and all the rest. So really, where do we start? Because I think that actually has to go hand in hand with technology.
Okay, I'm going to back that over to Bernard, but before we do, I think it's really important that... wow, that was wild. I think my microphone maybe just popped. I think it's important kind of as South Africans that we invite people from Africa to our cities, because diversity and inclusion is what cities thrive on. Yeah, but I'm going to bat that over to Bernard, and I'm so sorry for destroying your... It wasn't me.
No, so first of all, I'd like to say, I mean, smart solutions cannot compensate human behavior. That was what I was trying to say at the beginning. I didn't say it properly, but if you do not get citizen engagement on your solutions, they're not going to work. They won't work. They'll work for 6 months and then it won't work. So the most important thing is that people understand what you're doing, why you're doing, how you're doing it, and that they engage, and that they are okay with it, and that they're on board. So that for me is the first step. So yeah, nothing will work if people keep on acting the way they act. So part of being a smart city is, as you said, is getting smart people, making them change their ways. But people aren't dirty because they like being dirty. I mean, is there anyone here from Ivory Coast? Côte d'Ivoire. Okay, so I can say what I'm going to say. No one's gonna I lived in Abidjan for 3 years, and it was really depressing because there was a total decorrelation between the people and the city. It was as if they weren't, I mean, people are just littering everywhere, throwing things out of the car, etc. So I was talking with people, and it's because there is no confidence in the local authorities, so people are not making any effort at all. So you have to build that. I don't think Rwandan people are more clean than than anyone else, but there is this like top-down thing, which in Rwanda, you know that the rules that are applied to you are the same rules that are applied to everyone, right up there. And that is a concept that is not the same in all African countries. So for example, in Rwanda, you have once a month, there are utility works for everyone. So everyone, I mean everyone. So from 7 to 11, on the last Saturday of each month, you have to go out and clean your neighborhood or participate in some works. And if you take your car and try where you're stopped, and they'll make you work on the nearest thing next door. Everyone. So, and that was implemented, and it's implemented by the president. So he comes out and he sweeps his front, his front road. And so of course the ministers are going to do the same thing, and it just goes down. So there's this thing of example. So people, they're saying, okay, these rules are strict, but they are applied to everyone. So there is trust, and you need to build that. I mean, for everything. So so my answer is it can't work if you don't build that first. And these platforms, these citizen engagement platforms, are a way of going about it. But then you have to deliver, as I said.
I think that's such a lovely answer. And before I was at Inc. Africa, I was an investigative journalist with Daily Maverick. And I covered a lot of stories about service delivery, yeah. And I remember being in Ponderland, there was rubbish on the floor, and I proceeded to pick it up. And this old gogo came to me and said, no. put that down, if we pick up the rubbish, how is the government going to see that we have a problem with the refuse collection, that our service delivery is failed, you know? So we need to remember that people have languages, you know, and often, you know, you see these kind of protests and things like that, you know, and burning tires and that. In some research that is called the smoke that calls. If no one listens to you in a city, you know, how do you make your voice heard? Yeah, and behavior is very complex and tricky. We have a gentleman, the next, sir.
Okay, thank you. My name is Mulima. I'm from Zambia. Smart cities obviously involve the use of certain types of technologies. And so who should manage the infrastructure? Should it be the government to manage that technology? Or should the government perhaps just manage the data and let private entities manage the tech behind? Classic example is how incumbent telecom companies run by governments are a total disaster. So is there going to be huge amounts of money spent and then suddenly all this tech just goes to waste? Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much for that. I'm going to hand that over to Claude because as I'm sitting here, he's the, yes, I could see he was like getting into that question. Claude, your response, please.
So no, I'm probably not the good person to answer this, but I find it very interesting. It's always coming back to the problem of government-owned, state-owned enterprise and private enterprise, and what is the most efficient. I don't think there is a one answer to this, but someone needs to start to manage the data. So.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, if you go to Johannesburg, there's service delivery failure. What do? Do you just wait or do you step up into the breach? You know what I mean? And I think we've seen with the COVID-19 pandemic that business is assuming a much greater role with respect to the well-being and the wellness of humans, and surely that is humans within cities as well, because the economic hubs are primarily in cities, and you can see it at Inc. Africa. If we look at our traffic and that sort of thing, it virtually mirrors you know, the cities where there are the hugest amounts of economic activity. Yeah. There's another question, please.
Can we maybe just, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Oh, my goodness. I'm so sorry. Duval?
Yeah, so I think there's also a component of going back to the problem. You need to realize what's the problem that you're trying to solve in the city and who's supposed to be solving that problem. So is it a public good that needs to be solved? So traffic congestion is a massive thing for smart cities, public parking, all of these things. Then obviously government needs to step in, and private sector can be used as consultants or advisors to a certain extent. But then there's other issues where private and public partnerships could be massively beneficial. We've seen that in EV charging infrastructure, where certain policy, subsidies, stuff like that can really ensure that transition have clean air, cleaner cities, all of these things. So it's really, I don't think there's a blanket answer to that. It really depends on what part of the problem you're solving within a city.
Thanks. That's offered like a huge amount of nuance. Bernard?
No, I wanted to say that I think you can draw a line between two things. One is expertise. So the government cannot have all the expertise on all the different solutions that exist. So it would be better if they let the people who have the expertise run whatever that solution is. But then where the government has a role that no one else can do is with regards to regulation. Regulation, and how do I incentivize so that these private companies can, you know, beneficially, I mean, so that it's just economically viable on the long term on certain solutions. So sorry to bring it back to Rwanda, but with regards, for example, to EVs, they had very, very strong regulation. They decided to stop all taxes on the import of all electric vehicles and electric parts, etc., etc. So the government definitely has a role, but their role should be, how do I incentivize so that it goes in the direction I want it to go? So if I want to remove pollution, I want to, you know, have more electric vehicles, I want this, I want that. What do I do so that people go there because it's because it, you know, they can because it's sustainable economically for them? can do that. And yeah, so change is politically driven. I mean, I really believe that you really need a political will to be able to change these things. And the government can't just say the private sector is going to come and everything will change. No, the government has to have the will where things need to be pushed and to push in the right way.
Which of course is policy formation. DC, any thoughts you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the government structure and where and what part of the world you are in. I say that because in certain countries it's acceptable for the government to step in and be able to. I mean, let me frame it this way. So, would you rather have a Google or the government owning your data, for example?
A very interesting question.
We all carry mobile phones with us. Google and iPhone and Apple, they've got all their data from us, right? So would you rather have the government having the same amount of access to the data, your private data, or would you rather have, the private sector having that? So it's really dependent on how the structure is within that particular country. But I do echo what Bernard said about regulation. You really need to have a government that's pushing the regulation to be able to get anything implemented.
Thank you so much, DC. Do we have time for one more question? There we go.
Cool, thank you. Thank you guys. Josh Ramesher from Stellenbosch University Launch Lab, American, but I've been living in Africa for 7 years now and lived in Kigali and Kampala and other cities. And I want to throw it out there. We're very excited about e-mobility. So I'm curious because some of the air quality in these cities is really, really bad, right? We've seen what happens in China. We're starting to see it in parts of East Africa. So how do we get e-mobility and electric vehicles to scale quickly? Just curious to hear some viewpoints on that.
Great.
Okay, so first I'd have a question. How do you know the air pollution is bad in Kigali or Kampala?
So I lived in both of them for multiple years. We left actually Kampala.
Yeah, but how do you know it's bad? I'm not saying it's good, by the way. I'm just saying, how do you know it's bad?
Well, you have index and you can also see it every day.
That's the first problem is today we're not measuring air pollution. And so that is something that we are pushing. We're saying, I mean, if you want to change, I don't know if Kigali is polluted or not. I mean, of course, when I'm behind a truck that's, putting out black fumes, I'm saying this is bad, but I don't have the global picture. So you need to measure these things. That is also part of smart cities, putting up an infrastructure to measure air pollution, and then you're able to act on it. And then, so before I'm not going to monopolize it, but for example, one of the biggest polluters in Kigali, but I think it's the same thing in Nairobi, the same thing in Kampala, is these motor taxis. And there are hundreds and thousands of them. And this is love this story because they tick all the boxes with regards to an electric vehicle would be financially more viable for these motor taxis than is a petrol vehicle because they do long distance, they do all the right things. So they are ready. You ask any motor taxi, because I did a due diligence on this subject, so I know it a little bit. They're all waiting for that. Because for them, they'll earn more money, it is better on the take, etc., etc., etc. So what is blocking? There's regulation can help. And that's what I was saying, regulation. So Rwanda has decided that by 2025, you're not going to get a license for a motor taxi if you're not electric. So I don't know if they're going to be able to keep that, because that is really very ambitious, but they're trying to, everything they can do to do that. So they favor, so today, when you're charging a battery, you pay the same price as someone who's just using electricity for other things. So they're going to change that. You're going to have special electricity prices when you're charging for vehicles or stuff like that. As I said, they've removed all taxes on electric parts, etc. So those are things that can favor this industry. But the industry itself has to be viable. And so they'll start with motor taxis and they'll do buses, things that do long distance and that pollute. And I believe it's possible. But as I said, you need strong political will because you have other, interests on the side that are not, happy to just let things, run away from them. But political will can make a big difference here.
Okay, yeah. I'm just gonna give an answer before DC because he's actually the EV expert, so I want to go before him. But I think finance definitely plays a huge role. So I think what we've seen in East Africa and other places are that some of these solutions and technologies are already available to be deployed, but that upfront they are more expensive. over the lifetime, a lot of the times these technologies are actually cheaper for the relevant consumer that's using, or the taxi driver in East Africa. So I am biased because I do have a finance background, but there's definitely some financial engineering that can be done to accelerate the transition. Yeah.
I don't think I can probably add any more to it, other than just saying regulation, regulation, regulation. The government needs to push regulation. All these changes, our transition from ICE vehicles to EV vehicles is not going to happen just by people wanting for it to happen. There needs to be some push by the government and some incentives. Most of these countries that have adopted EVs or are adopting EVs post 2030, it's always been through the government saying, look, this is what we're going to do, and these are the incentives that we're going to offer, and then you start getting the private sector coming in. So, number one, regulation. Number two, incentives. Number three is now looking at people's mindsets, changing them from saying, I think there's a lot of what we call range anxiety. Am I going to drive an EV car and I'm going to drive from Cape Town to Johannesburg? Is the thing going to run out of battery, right? So it's change of mindset and being able to see that there are solutions out there. There's infrastructure that's going to be built, and we need to start moving on from the old way of thinking.
Great. I think we're just about on time. So it just leaves me to thank Bernard, Deval, DC, and Claude. Thank you very much for your depth and the nuance that you brought to this panel on smart cities. And thanks everyone in the audience and for the great questions.